There comes a moment in certain relationships when words stop working, when explanations exhaust themselves, when effort no longer brings closeness, only confusion. And in that moment, silence appears not as avoidance but as self preservation. Long no contact is often misunderstood as cruelty or punishment, but in truth, it is a psychological shift. It is the moment someone chooses to step out of a dynamic that required them to constantly explain, defend, and diminish themselves just to be heard. When the silence stretches on, it does something powerful. It removes the familiar rhythm the relationship depended on. No reactions, no reassurance, no conflict to recycle. What remains is not emptiness, but exposure. And it is in this exposure that the narcissist's true relationship to control, identity, and connection begins to surface. Tonight, we are not here to examine why people leave, but to understand what happens when they truly stay gone. Because the way a narcissist reacts to long no contact tells a story far deeper than words ever could. Long no contact destabilizes a narcissist's sense of control and identity because their inner world is built on external regulation rather than internal stability. A narcissist does not experience relationships as mutual emotional exchanges, but as systems of reinforcement where attention, reaction, admiration, or even conflict confirms their importance. When long no contact is initiated, it removes this reinforcement entirely. What makes it especially destabilizing is that the silence is not dramatic. There is no argument to win, no explanation to twist, no emotional response to manipulate. The absence itself becomes the message, and that message quietly erodes the narcissist's perceived authority. Control is central to how a narcissist feels safe. Control over the narrative, over timing, over emotional closeness and distance. Long no contact strips away this control without confrontation. They cannot provoke reassurance or provoke anger to reestablish dominance. This loss of influence often creates an internal sense of chaos because their identity depends on being the emotional reference point for others. Without access to you, they lose a crucial anchor that told them who they were in the relationship. They may still appear confident outwardly, but internally they experience a disorienting gap where certainty used to live. Identity destabilization follows closely behind the loss of control. Narcissists define themselves relationally, not introspectively. They know who they are by how others respond to them. Long no contact interrupts that feedback loop. Without your reactions, memories begin to feel unreliable. They replay interactions not for connection, but to reassure themselves that they once mattered. This repetitive mental revisiting is an attempt to stabilize an identity that now feels unmoored. The silence forces them to confront something they have long avoided, the absence of a solid self when no one is watching. This destabilization often triggers contradictory behaviors. On one hand, they may inflate their self-image, exaggerating achievements or projecting exaggerated indifference. On the other hand, they may experience moments of insecurity, obsession, or fixation on regaining relevance. These shifts are not growth or reflection, but emergency responses to an identity threat. Long no contact represents a boundary they cannot cross, and that boundary exposes the limits of their influence. What makes long no contact uniquely powerful is that it does not attack the narcissist directly. It does not accuse, argue, or explain. It simply withdraws participation. This forces the narcissist to face a reality they are poorly equipped to handle, that control does not exist without consent, and identity cannot survive on echoes alone. Silence is interpreted as rejection rather than closure because a narcissist experiences the end of contact not as a mutual conclusion, but as a personal verdict on their worth and dominance. Closure implies acceptance, reflection, and emotional processing, all of which require humility and self awareness. A narcissist does not approach silence with curiosity or grief in a healthy sense. Instead, they experience it as an intentional withdrawal of validation. The absence of communication feels less like an ending and more like being erased from a role they believed was permanent. In the narcissistic mind, relationships are not chapters that naturally close. They are extensions of the self. When you stop responding, the narcissist does not assume you are healing or moving on. They assume you are rejecting them as an authority, denying them access to influence, and refusing to play your assigned part. This perception transforms silence into an insult. It is not the loss of connection that hurts most, but the loss of entitlement to your emotional availability. Because narcissists rely heavily on external affirmation, silence disrupts their internal equilibrium. They begin to fill the void with interpretations that protect their ego. Rather than acknowledging that the relationship ended due to harm or imbalance, they frame your silence as cruelty, immaturity, or manipulation. This reframing allows them to avoid responsibility while maintaining a sense of superiority. If silence were closure, it would suggest finality. Rejection, however, implies an injustice that can still be corrected or avenged. This interpretation often leads to heightened emotional reactivity. The narcissist may cycle between longing and hostility, imagining scenarios in which you regret leaving or suffer without them. These fantasies serve to restore power in their internal narrative. Silence becomes something to defeat rather than respect. The more time passes without contact, the more the narcissist may feel compelled to reinterpret your absence as deliberate punishment, because accepting closure would mean accepting that they no longer matter in your emotional world. Silence also removes the narcissist's ability to control the story. When there is no conversation, they cannot negotiate meaning or extract reassurance. This lack of narrative control intensifies the feeling of rejection. They may respond by creating their own version of events, often portraying themselves as misunderstood or abandoned. This story is not about truth, but about restoring dignity in the face of perceived dismissal. Ultimately, long silence forces the narcissist to confront a painful reality they resist. That connection requires mutual participation and cannot be enforced. Because they are unable to sit with this truth, silence remains rejection in their mind, not closure, reinforcing a wound that no amount of justification can fully soothe. Narcissists oscillate between rage, denial, and strategic calm because long no contact places them in an emotional position they are not designed to tolerate. The sudden loss of access to someone who once provided attention, validation, or emotional engagement creates an internal threat response. Their emotional system reacts not with steady grief, but with instability, moving rapidly between extremes as they attempt to regain balance without genuine self-reflection. Rage is often the first emotional surge, even if it remains hidden. This anger is rooted in entitlement. From the narcissist's perspective, they did not simply lose a relationship, they were defied. Your silence feels like disobedience, a refusal to respond to their influence. Rage restores a temporary sense of power because anger allows them to feel dominant rather than abandoned. Even if this rage is not expressed outwardly, It plays out internally through resentment, hostile fantasies, or character assassination in their private narrative. When rage becomes too uncomfortable or threatens their self image, denial takes over. Denial allows the narcissist to minimize the significance of the separation. They may convince themselves that the no contact is meaningless, temporary, or a sign that you are struggling without them. This mental maneuver protects their ego from confronting rejection. By denying the permanence of the silence, they preserve the illusion that they remain central and irreplaceable. Denial also enables emotional detachment without processing loss, which feels safer than vulnerability. Strategic calm emerges when neither rage nor denial restores stability. This phase is often mistaken for maturity or growth. The narcissist may appear composed, reflective, even compassionate. However, this calm is not grounded in acceptance. It is calculated. Strategic calm is a tool used to reestablish access or control. They carefully regulate their behavior, suppressing overt emotion and presenting themselves as reasonable and evolved. This demeanor is designed to lower defenses, provoke curiosity, or invite re-engagement without triggering resistance. These emotional shifts are not linear or resolved. A narcissist may cycle through them repeatedly, sometimes within the same day. The oscillation reflects an inability to integrate loss into a coherent emotional narrative. Instead of mourning the relationship, they manage the threat it poses to their identity. Each state serves a purpose. Rage energizes, denial numbs, and strategic calm manipulates. What underlies this fluctuation is the absence of emotional object constancy. When contact is gone, the narcissist struggles to hold a stable image of the relationship or of themselves within it. Long no contact exposes this fragility. Without your presence to anchor their emotions, they move between extremes in an attempt to regain equilibrium, never fully settling because true acceptance would require humility they cannot sustain. Hoovering attempts become more calculated over time because long no contact forces the narcissist to adapt rather than react impulsively. In the early absence, their efforts to regain contact are often emotional and poorly regulated, driven by panic, anger, or entitlement. When these immediate attempts fail or receive no response, the narcissist learns that direct pressure no longer works. What follows is not surrender, but strategy. With time, the narcissist begins to study the silence. They replay past interactions, searching for emotional entry points that once worked. They remember what made you soften, what made you explain yourself, what triggered guilt or hope. Hoovering then shifts from obvious intrusion to subtle manipulation. Messages become carefully worded, timed around moments of vulnerability such as anniversaries, holidays, or crises. The goal is no longer to overpower your boundary, but to bypass it. Calculated hoovering often wears the mask of self-awareness. Apologies may appear thoughtful, acknowledging pain without accepting responsibility. There may be references to therapy, personal growth, or sudden insight. These signals are designed to create doubt in your mind, to make you question whether the narcissist has changed or whether walking away was premature. The performance of reflection is meant to reopen emotional dialogue, not to repair harm. Another form of calculated hoovering is indirect contact. The narcissist may reach out through mutual acquaintances, social media activity, or public gestures meant to be seen but not addressed. This allows them to test your emotional availability without risking direct rejection. If you react even silently, they interpret it as proof of continued influence. Silence, however, forces them to escalate creatively, refining their approach rather than abandoning it. As time passes, hoovering can also take on a moral tone. The narcissist may frame themselves as misunderstood, lonely, or unfairly punished. This narrative appeals to empathy and positions you as the one withholding closure or compassion. It is a subtle reversal of roles that pressures you to respond in order to restore balance. The manipulation lies in making you responsible for their emotional state. What makes long-term hoovering particularly dangerous is its patience. Unlike explosive attempts, calculated hoovering waits for emotional fatigue to set in. The narcissist understands that boundaries weaken when people are tired, nostalgic, or doubting themselves. Their persistence is not proof of love, but of unresolved entitlement. Long no contact exposes this pattern clearly. Each refined attempt reveals not transformation, but determination to regain access. The calculation itself is the signal, showing that the goal has never shifted from control to connection. Public image management intensifies after prolonged silence because the narcissist loses a private audience and must compensate with a public one. When long no contact removes their access to you, it also removes a space where they could influence perception directly. They can no longer correct you, charm you, or intimidate you into holding their preferred version of reality. This loss creates anxiety around how they are seen, not just by you, but by the world that now exists beyond their control. A narcissist's identity is deeply tied to appearance. How they are perceived often matters more than how they behave. After prolonged silence, they become acutely aware that you are forming a narrative without them. This triggers an urgent need to shape a counter-narrative. They may suddenly appear more successful, more generous, more socially connected, or more enlightened. These displays are not coincidental. They are designed to broadcast stability and desirability, reassuring themselves and others that they are thriving without you. Social platforms and shared spaces become tools in this process. The narcissist may post more frequently, exaggerate achievements, or showcase new relationships. These actions are meant to signal replacement and abundance, implying that your absence is insignificant. At the same time, they serve as indirect communication. Even without direct contact, the narcissist hopes you will see these performances and feel regret, jealousy, or doubt. The audience is broad, but the message is targeted. In some cases, the narcissist adopts the role of the victim. They subtly suggest betrayal, abandonment, or misunderstanding, casting themselves as the one who endured unfair treatment. This strategy recruits sympathy while protecting their ego. If others validate their pain, it becomes easier to avoid accountability. Public empathy replaces private reflection, and the narcissist feels restored through external affirmation rather than internal growth. Public image management also acts as a defense against shame. Long no contact confronts the narcissist with the possibility that they were not essential. That thought is deeply threatening. By controlling how they are seen, they regain a sense of power. Praise, admiration, or even pity become substitutes for the validation they lost. The more silent you remain, the louder their performance often becomes. What is striking is that this intensification is rarely about genuine connection. It is about visibility. Being seen, admired, or discussed reassures the narcissist that they still exist in the emotional landscape. Long no contact removes the intimate mirror, so they construct a larger stage. The performance continues not because they have healed, but because without attention, their sense of self begins to fade. True indifference from the survivor is the deepest narcissistic wound because it removes the narcissist from the center of the emotional universe they believe they occupy. Narcissists are not sustained by love alone. They are sustained by impact, admiration, anger, fear, devotion, even pain all serve the same function, confirming their significance. Indifference offers none of this. It is not hostile enough to fight and not emotional enough to manipulate. It quietly communicates that they no longer matter. For a narcissist, being disliked is tolerable. Being argued with is engaging. Even being hated maintains a connection. Indifference, however, collapses the entire relational structure. When the survivor no longer reacts, explains, or checks in, the narcissist loses their role. There is no emotional leverage left. This is experienced not as loss, but as annihilation of influence. They are not missed, feared, or resisted. They are simply absent from the survivor's inner life. This wound cuts deeper than abandonment because it cannot be reframed easily. Narcissists are skilled at rewriting narratives to protect their ego. They can portray rejection as jealousy, boundaries as cruelty, or distance as immaturity. Indifference resists reinterpretation. It provides no emotional data. There is nothing to twist, no signal to decode. The silence feels final not because it is loud, but because it is empty. True indifference also removes the narcissist's ability to provoke reassurance. Attempts to trigger emotion through guilt, nostalgia, or intimidation fall flat. When there is no response, the narcissist is forced to confront a terrifying realization that their presence is no longer necessary to regulate another person's emotions. This undermines the core belief that they are indispensable. Internally, this can lead to a sense of collapse. Without emotional feedback, the narcissist may experience restlessness, irritability, or a hollow feeling they cannot name. They may intensify hoovering, escalate public performance, or attach quickly to new sources of attention. These are not signs of recovery, but of desperation to escape the void that indifference exposes. What makes indifference so powerful is that it is not an act of punishment. It is a byproduct of healing. The survivor no longer orients their emotional world around the narcissist. There is no need to prove, defend, or resist. Life moves forward without reference to the past dynamic. This is the moment the narcissist senses they have truly lost access, not to a person, but to the power they once held. Long no contact ultimately reveals a truth that is difficult for narcissists to face and liberating for those who step away. What unfolds after the silence is not a journey of love lost, but a struggle for control, relevance, and identity. Each reaction, the anger, the denial, the calculated calm, the strategic hoovering, the public performance, and the collapse in the face of indifference exposes how deeply the narcissist depends on external validation to exist comfortably within themselves. The silence does not create their instability, it uncovers it. For the survivor, this understanding brings clarity. The reactions that follow long no contact are not signs of transformation or enduring attachment, but symptoms of a system losing its source of regulation. When you withdraw your emotional presence, you are no longer participating in sustaining a fragile ego. The absence becomes a boundary that speaks more clearly than words ever could. In the end, long no contact is not about winning, punishing, or proving anything. It is about reclaiming authorship over your emotional life. As the narcissist reacts, adapts, and performs, the survivor steps into a quieter, more grounded reality where peace replaces vigilance. The true conclusion is not their response to the silence, but your freedom within it.